Hey everybody, in this video we're going to continue on with the menu system of the Sony A9 and A9II camera bodies. We're going to do chapter number 2, which is the camera with the 2 on it, and we're going to cover all of the menu items there, what you need to think about to get your camera set up for wildlife photography and specifically for birds in flight. So let's go dive into that menu system again. Okay, so jumping into chapter number 2 of the menu system, and again the way we navigate between chapters is by using our front control dial, which is up here in the front of the camera. I'm going to spin that one time and we jump to number 2. This is a lot of movie stuff, and I don't do that many movies while I'm out in the field, but sometimes something shows up and I think that it'll show really good as a movie, and so I will do a quick movie, so I'll set up a few of these items for you. The first two are grayed out. That's because in your main mode dial here, you have to actually be in a movie mode or the S&Q mode in order to change those. Right now my camera's in an aperture priority mode, ready for still photography, so those two are grayed out. This one here is your file format. Of course you can do 4K movies with this, and I find that for me full HD is enough. I don't need the 4K because I'm not a movie maker, so I just choose HD and that's good enough for me. The next item is our frame rate and our bit rate. Of course, when you have higher frame rates, you can slow those down for slow motion. If you're going to post-process your video and make it into a slow motion video, you want a higher frame rate. And then the bit rate, the higher the bit rate, the higher the quality of the movie. So there are lots of choices there, but I find that 120p by 100M has been working fine for me, so that's where I've got mine set. S&Q settings is next. That stands for slow motion recording and quick motion recording. You can do things like a bird taking off, and you can also do clouds moving or a flower opening. I haven't done anything with the quick motion recording just yet, but I have done lots with the slow motion recording, and the best settings for that to get awesome movies like this is 24p by 120 FPS. That gives you ×5 slow motion. Any other changes there and your amount of the slow motion that the camera gives goes down, and so I like the slowest motion I can get, so that's why I choose the settings that I have here, 24p and 120 frames per second. One other thing about the S&Q settings that I forgot to mention is that it does not record sound, so when you do an S&Q you're not going to record any of the audio. And another thing is, for S&Q settings, in order to get that mode, you have to actually come up here and push down on your center of your main mode dial here and spin that until you get to the S&Q. You cannot set that up to a custom function button. I wish you could, but you cannot. Okay, let's move on. Proxy recording, what that means is that it records a small movie along with a normal movie, and that's easier to review when you're doing your reviewing of movies, but I don't need that, so I set that to the off position. And now we'll go to page 2. Page 2 here, this is a lot of movie things that I don't change. The autofocus drive speed I leave at normal. The autofocus tracking sensitivity I leave at standard. Auto slow shutters not available from the parameters that I chose, which were 120 frames per second and 100 bit rate. It's just not available. The initial focus magnification I leave on 1. I don't need to have a magnified image when I'm doing movies. Audio recording I leave on, although most of the time I remove the audio track when I'm using the movies, but I record it anyway. And the audio record level is grayed out, and that's because I'm not in a movie mode currently. I'm in aperture priority mode because most of the time I'm doing stills, so that's grayed out. Move on to page 3. The audio level display, that just shows you where your audio is coming in. I leave that on, doesn't matter either way. Audio out timing, I just leave that at live. I haven't changed anything there. The wind noise reduction I have off. If I am trying to get the sound and it's really windy, I would turn that to on. But for me, most of the time, I remove the soundtrack as I said, so I just leave that to off. The marker display, if you do some settings for if you go into this one first and set up some parameters for your markers, things like the aspect ratio, the center of the frame, the safety zone for TV viewing, then you can display it here, but I don't set any of that up, so I leave that to the off, and here I don't do anything. And video light mode, that's an external light that is used for videos. I don't have one, so I just leave it at the default, which happened to be PowerLink. But if you had a special video light, you would want to set up the way that it lights up the scene here. Moving on to page 4, movie with the shutter. That means that if you're in movie mode, you can press the shutter to start the movie and press the shutter again to stop the movie. And I also have this button here as a dedicated movie button, and that's set up in the later menu. But I like to be able to start my movies there and stop my movies there without having to go into the main mode dial and set it on to a movie mode. That's all for page 4. Page 5, shutter type. I use electronic shutter most of the time. It gives you 20 frames per second when you're in high-speed shooting. And the times when I don't use electronic shutter is when I'm using a flash. You have to remember that if you attach a flash to your hot shoe, you cannot use electronic shutter, so that'll switch, or you have to switch it to mechanical shutter. E-front curtain shutter is grayed out. That's because I'm in the electronic shutter, so I don't need that, and that's okay. It's grayed out. Release without lens. If there's not a lens on there, I don't want to be taking pictures, so I disabled that. Release without the card. Same thing, I don't want to be taking pictures if I don't have a card in there, so I've disabled that. Steady shot is off. The reason for that is because the lens that I'm using has its own OSS built into it. That's Sony's 200 to 600, so that's grayed out, not available. If you do attach a lens that doesn't have the OSS built in, then you would turn on this steady shot here. Steady shot settings, then you can set some parameters, what you want to do. They're all grayed out right now because the lens, as I said, that I've got attached has its own steady shot built into it. Page 6, everything here is zoom in the zoom menu is grayed out, and the reason for that is because I don't have a lens on there that has any sort of digital zoom or a zoom ring rotate or anything like that. Moving on to page 7, we have our display auto review menus. There's lots to cover here. The display button is first. You want to select that. And then you have your monitor, which is this screen out here. And then, of course, your viewfinder is when you're looking through the camera. And you can change what information you see, both in the monitor and in the finder. So for my monitor, I have set up to show all info. That's all your shooting info. And no info, so I get a full screen of my picture so I can see that. And then the other ones I've got unchecked. If you wanted to see your histograms, you come down here and put a check mark on histogram if that's what you want to see. That's going to be another screen that you toggle through. I don't care for that, so I leave that off. And then, of course, you can get your level, viewfinder, and the monitor off. So that means the monitor goes off when you get to that one. And then when you get to the ones you want, you come over here and you hit enter. And so now we can I'll show you my monitor settings as I go through. When I turn off my menu system, here's the one with all my shooting information, my parameters, what I'm in, AFC, electronic shutter, and so on and so forth. And then as I hit this display button, this is what they're talking about, the up on the wheel, your main control wheel, you push up on it. My next one is just the shooting information, 1/8 of a second at f6.3. This is what it's set at right now. And then one more time I hit it, and it goes away, so it's a blank screen. Okay? Now, also for the display, you have for your finder. You can set the same sort of things when you're looking through the camera, and you can set up different things that you see when you're looking in for the finder. And I have the same sort of thing set up for my viewfinder. Now, finder monitor, I have that on auto. What that means is that you can see when I am looking at the outside of the screen, the monitor is on. When I look through the viewfinder, of course, with my eye, then I cover up that, and the camera knows that, and so the information jumps to the viewfinder. So you can see, as I move my thumb away, it comes from one to the other. So if you've got that set to viewfinder manual or monitor manual, it's difficult to use this because you won't see the information if it's just set to the viewfinder. And so you think your information is gone, but you actually have to look through the viewfinder to see that. So I prefer it to be on auto so that if I'm using the outside of the camera to set something, I can see it there. And then if I move my eye to the inside of the viewfinder, it'll jump to there as well. So that's auto. Finder frame rate, I just leave at standard. And then the zebra setting, I don't use, but some people use it for exposure. It gives you a set of stripes that are displayed to adjust the brightness, but I don't use that, so I just have it set to off. The grid line I do like to have. That's a change that I've made. I like the rule of thirds grid. It just helps sort of with composition sometimes and to level the horizon when you're shooting. So I have that set up to be on. Exposure set guide, I just leave that to off. What that does is it displays the exposure settings when you change those in the shooting screen, but I just leave it off. And we'll move on to page 8. The first item here is live view display. I've got that set to be on. That means if I've changed the white balance or if I've got my exposure compensation set, then that effect will show up in the viewfinder or on the monitor here, and that's a helpful tool so you know if your picture is going to come out really dark or really bright, or if something's wrong with your white balance. So I leave that on. The next two items have to do with blackout shooting, and I don't do anything with that, so I leave shooting start display off and the shooting timing display on as the default type 1. Continuous shooting length, that displays if you're in continuous shooting and you're just holding down your shutter button, how much more time you have left to shoot at the current rate. I don't care about that, so I don't display that. Auto review, I have that off. What that means is when you take a picture, does the picture show up on the screen and let you review it? I find that the camera reacts a lot quicker and it's a lot easier to work with if you just don't display the pictures each time you take them. So I set that to off. Okay, we'll move on to page 9. Custom operation here. This is where you're going to set up your custom keys. In this page here, custom keys, you select it. And then you have 4 choices, 4 pages of things that you can set custom controls to. And I can go through what mine are set up, and we'll do that right now. All right, so the first one I have is number 1 is this wheel, the main control wheel. Now this is a shooting custom key, and I don't have that set to do anything. Number 2 is my AEL button here. I've got that to recall my custom hold 1. Number 3 is the AF on button. That's my back button focus. Number 4 is a depth of field preview button. I don't use that for wildlife photography, but with scenic photography, when I'm on a tripod, I've got that set up to this button over here. It's a little hard to get to while I'm hand holding, so that's why it's only for my scenic photography. Number 5 is actually the trash can, and when you're in shooting mode, that can be a custom button number 4, and I have it set up to do a AF APS-C full frame toggle. So what I can do is I press the trash can and then I'm in APS-C mode, so I get essentially a digital zoom, and then I press it again and I'm back to full frame. Page 2, here in the custom key and the shooting custom keys, number 1 is this multi-function button, and I've got that to recall my custom hold 2. AF/MF control hold is the center of my wheel. I've got that, so what that means is I hold that button down and then I can manually focus. Then I let go of it and I'm back to autofocus. Number 3 is pressing to the left of the control wheel. I have that not set. Number 4 by default, it even says so on the camera, is the ISO. I leave that there. That's a very convenient way to change your ISO when you're out in the field. And number 5 is pressing down on the control wheel, and I have that not set at the moment as well. Moving over to page 3, we're at the top of the camera. I have custom button number 1 to do my white balance, and custom button number 2 to change my focus area. And the last one, page 4, is the lens buttons. If your lens has custom buttons, you can set any number of things for it to do there, but I have it to just do basically the same as the back button focus. So when my hand's up on the lens, I can autofocus there and continuously focus while holding that button down. Menu brings us back into there. Then we have a whole bunch of custom keys we can set up for movies. And I haven't set any of those. I've just left them all at the defaults because I don't do that many movies. And I'm fine with the way it is. Custom keys while we're reviewing images comes next. And again, you select it by hitting the center of your control wheel. And then on the back of the camera, there are 2 places where you can put custom buttons. Custom 3 I have right here. That's this button here I've got set up to do enlarge the image. And number 2, which is the function button, I have to do a voice memo in case I want to make a memo on one of the pictures that I took. But I find page 2 to be a little more useful here. And what I have that is number 1 is that it enlarges the image, so that when I'm reviewing images through the viewfinder, I just hit that button there and it enlarges it so I can check for focus. And number 2, this is very useful, I have it set to playback, select the playback media. So that means I've got my movies going to slot 2 and my stills going to slot 1. And I can select that very easily while reviewing images by just hitting custom button number 2 here on the top of the camera. Function menu settings is our next item. There's where you set the 12 most used things to this button here, this function button, so that way you don't have to go into the menu to change those. You select it by hitting the center of your control wheel, and then you have both a still function menu and a movie function menu, and you can set any number of parameters there. For example, this one here is my focus area. I've got that set, you can see there, but there are 15 pages of choices of what things you can put in that function menu, and you can customize that however you want so that when you're out in the field you just hit that button and that brings up those 12 things that you use all the time without going into another menu. Very useful, and that's how you set those up. My dial settings is next. That's to customize the settings for your front dial and your back dial that are back here. I haven't made any changes to those, but you can do that by selecting that, going in here, and if you wanted to change your front dial, I did have it actually set to ISO, but if you wanted to change that, you select it, and then you can go up and say, well, I'd rather have that do the aperture. So then you select aperture, and then you come down and select OK, and my dial can be recalled with the custom key. So you're all set with that. The dial setup, I have this set up as front dial is aperture value and the back dial is a time value for your when you're in shutter priority mode. Now we move on to page 10. Here we have the aperture value, time value, rotate. I leave that at normal, but you can reverse that by going in here. I like it to do normal, so I leave it there. The dial EV compensation, that's if you want to compensate with a plus or a minus on your stops. Instead of using your compensation dial, which is here on the top of the camera, you can use either your front dial for that or your rear dial for that, but I leave that off and I'm doing my compensation by using the knob that's meant to do that right here on top of the camera. Function ring lens is grayed out. That's not supported with the current lens that I'm using, so I just leave that grayed out. Touch focus, that's if you're going to allow your screen to touch, you touch it and then it'll focus on something. That's helpful sometimes for video, and I just leave that at the default, which is touch focus. This one I think is important, the movie button. That's this button here with a red dot on it. Leave that to always. That way when you're out in the field, you don't have to go up here. If you want to do a quick movie, you don't have to change your main mode dial in order to do a movie. You can just hit that button with a red dot, you start your movie, and then when you're done with your movie, you hit that button again, and it'll stop the movie. That's very useful without having to change anything to have a quick movie mode like that. Lock operation parts, I leave that off. That allows you, if you wanted to turn it on, you can lock the control wheel or the front dial or the back dial while you're pressing and holding the function button, but I don't find that useful, so I just leave it at the default, which is off. And our last page of chapter number 2 is page 11, audio signals. This means that if you're using the electronic shutter, it doesn't actually make any noise. So you make the camera have a noise so that you can hear it going. Otherwise, you don't know whether you're shooting or not sometimes. So I leave that to on all the time. Okay, that was a lot of information that we just covered. That was chapter number 2 out of 6 in the menu system of the Sony A9 and A9II camera bodies. We're getting you set up for your wildlife photography and your birds in flight. Stick with me, the other 4 videos are on their way. And as always, I appreciate you watching my videos. And if you have further comments or questions, feel free to hit me up via email by clicking the link to my website, or you can do that in the comments section down below as well. Thanks a lot, and see you soon.